Chapter 52. It was a warm August Sunday afternoon, and Keith and I were in bed. Sunday afternoons in bed were something of a tradition by this point. Well fucked and smiling, what little there was in the way of cool breezes tickling our naked skin. I was very nearly asleep, so when the telephone rang, I jumped halfway out of bed in a single bound. My hello was woozy and a little perturbed. When a familiar husky voice said, "Baby Bear?" I nearly fainted dead away. "Papa Bear?" I said. Out of the corner of my eye, I could swear I saw the muscles of Keith's shoulders tense. I had met Sylvester Stewart my sophomore year at the Big U. I was in the chorus of the Opera Workshop's production of Aufstand und Fall der Stadt Mahogany, Brecht and Weill, you know. It was easily the most horrendous production of a Kurzweil opera ever mounted, but that's a side issue. Stage managing this disaster was a 6-foot 40-ish teddy bear of a man, as burly and barrel-chested a daddy as ever was. He was about as male could be, strictly T.O., testosterone overload. He was almost totally bald, and sported a blue-black 5 o'clock shadow by noon. Tufts of dense black hair played peekaboo over the collars of his polo shirts. He'd sweat great wet swatches down and across his back and chest at the very mention of physical exertion. He turned me on. And while I took pleasurable notice when he smiled at me or winked at me or slapped at my ass while I waited in the wings for an entrance, I considered none of these acts conclusive. He seemed pretty chummy with the entire cast. The first move, if any, would have been his. I was alone backstage one evening while the company was taking 5, brushing up on my time step just for the hell of it. Stamp, hop, shuffle, ball, change, stamp, hop, shuffle, ball, change, when all at once he was standing there, leaning against the wall, a bushy black eyebrow raising on his endless forehead. He said, "Hi." Stamp, hop, hop, trip, trip, stumble, fuck it. "Hello? Johnny Ray, right?" "Uh-huh." Sylvester Stewart. He held out a huge hirsute paw of a hand which I allowed to encircle mine about 1.5 times. "Really?" "Really what?" "Sylvester Stewart," I said. "What about it?" "You know," I said in my wanted, come on, everybody knows this attitude. "You have the same name as the leader of Sly and the Family Stone." "Whose family?" he said. "Skip it," I said. "All right," he said, moving in close enough for me to smell the dentine he was chewing. "I was wondering if you had any dinner plans for tonight." "Actually," I said, my breath ruffling Sylvester Stewart's chest hair, "I thought I might have it with you." And have it with him I did. We tore a roast chicken at the Old World, shared a carafe of the House Chablis, despite my being barely 19 years old, and we were in Sly's split-level brick front Westwood apartment, and in Sly's bed before you could say hot fun in the summertime. Sly wore a permanent fur coat. Only his palms, the soles of his big feet, and his shiny bald pate were fur-free. It would have required a lesser imagination than my own to dub him Papa Bear. He loved me sweetly and gently, and I slept all night in his fuzzy arms. During the 2 months or so during and following the production of Mahogany, Sly treated me to dinner at Ma Maison, where we saw Diane Cannon spill shrimp cocktail across the front of a cream-colored Bob Mackie original. He escorted me to a Leontine Prince recital and got me backstage to meet the diva herself. He brought me a gold and garnet pinky ring, which I subsequently danced right off my finger one night at Studio One. It flew from my hand to parts unknown, and I have yet to receive so much as a postcard from it since. He announced one evening that I was his long-lost son, his baby bear. The fact that Sly was quite Caucasian notwithstanding, and we promised we would never lose contact. 2 weeks later, Sly flew to Paris for an extended stay. To write, he said. I didn't hear from him for over 3 years. I did, however, read his first novel, Blue Shadows, a briskly moving, briskly selling murder mystery starring a gay detective. "How'd you find me?" I sat cross-legged on the floor, leaning back against the dresser whereon the telephone squatted. "I found you," Sly said. That would be all Sly would ever tell me on that subject. He did that sometimes. He liked to be mysterious. "I can't talk long," he continued. "I was wondering if you're free for dinner next Saturday night." "I don't know. I'll have to ask," I said. I palmed the mouthpiece. "Hey, big fella," I called to the immobile figure on the bed. "An old friend of mine wants to have dinner with me next Saturday night. Can I go?" I don't care, Keith said, half in the pillow. Even muffled, I was sure that Keith's I don't care was as far from the truth as east is from west, but in what amounted to a spasm of rather childish selfishness, at best, I chose to ignore. Did your daddy say you could go? Sly said when I got back on the line. Yes, I let the sarcasm in Sly's voice go by. He did. This guy makes you happy? Very, I said. When I crawled back into bed, I found Keith in his cool, silent mode. Not surprising. So who is this old friend? He asked, his back turned to me. An old friend from my bygone college days. He's older, pushing 45 by now, I should think. Old flame? No, I hedged. Not really. What do you mean, not really? Keith's voice was steadily raising in volume. Did you sleep with him or what? Yes, Keith. As a matter of fact, I did sleep with him a couple of times. That was several years ago. I'm gonna sleep with him next week? That was uncalled for, Keith. Maybe, he said, but let's face it, KT, you do have this problem about keeping your clothes on. Thanks a lot, honey, I said, rolling out of bed and onto my feet. I yanked on my jeans and t-shirt and snatched up my Adidas running shoes. I'll see you later, okay? Go ahead. Keith rolled over onto his back, propped up on his elbows, his face contorted in anger. Why wait? Why don't you go find your goddamn Papa Bear right now, goddamn little slut? Hey, fuck you, okay? Why is it my wit always seems to take an unscheduled leave of absence just when I really need it? All right, never mind. Hey, fuck you, okay? Why is it my wit always seems to take an unscheduled leave of absence just when I really need it? I ran downstairs. I could just hear Keith yell, well, fuck you too, as I slammed the front door. I was smearing the tears off my face when I arrived at Snooky's, where I settled in for several cups of coffee and a good long cry. It was dark when I got back home. I found Keith sitting ramrod straight in the blue wing chair, staring intently into a 2-day-old Wall Street Journal. I sat across from him on the couch. We really ought to talk about this, I said to the paper. It did not move. All right, said a tight voice behind the newspaper. I don't want you to go. Now you talk about it. Keith. I tried not to raise my voice, but it wasn't working. Sly is an old friend of mine. I haven't seen him in years. I just want to see him, that's all. What's the big fucking deal? Keith slapped the paper down in his lap. I bet he just thinks you're the cutest thing, doesn't he? What? I bet he's always making over you like you're just the hottest little hunk of meat in all creation, isn't he? Isn't he? You just want to have your goddamn little ego boosted, don't you? Well, boys and girls, he had me there. As a matter of fact, Sly did think I was the greatest invention since the chicken taco, and took every opportunity to tell me so. You know something? He often say to me. You're just about the most beautiful thing I'd ever seen. I'd point out some perfect little blonde creature, and Sly would say, commonplace, ho-hum, I'll take a beautiful mongrel like you any time. That's what Sly liked to call me, with my African and French and Indian, and heaven knows what all blood. Mongrel. He called me his beautiful mongrel. He claimed someday he was going to marry some woman just so he could adopt a house full of beautiful mongrel children. Damn right, I was looking forward to having Sly tell me I was the prettiest thing that ever walked over $100 dinner at La Hermitage. So what? And here Keith was making it sound as if we planned to go out and eat babies. I was desperately trying to scratch up a suitable reply when I noticed the nearly empty martini glass that had formed a wet ring on the uncoastered coffee table. You're drunk, I said in my best bet Davis accusatory tone, hoping to throw Keith onto the defensive. Anesthetized, that's hard to say, he said, and don't try to change the subject. He threw the newspaper to the floor and stood up. I sprang up from the couch. You're good with words, babe, but you're not going to talk your way out of this. He walked slowly towards me as he spoke. Now, it's not as if I don't want you to have friends. You know that's not true. I just don't like the thought of you running off with some guy you used to fuck. I'm sure you think that's very small-minded and old-fashioned, but I'm afraid I'm just not as hip and sophisticated as you and your showbiz friends. I'm sorry. He stood so close, the gin on his breath surrounded me. Now, if you're going to be with me, then you're going to have to be with me. Nobody else, KT. Just with me. Of course I'm with you. I reached out to touch Keith's face, ready to try and sweet-talk Keith out of his anger, as I often could, but this time he was having none of it. "No," he said, and lashed out with his right hand, backslapping me across the mouth, knocking me to the floor. I grabbed at Keith's legs, and between my blind rage at the taste of my own blood and Keith's drunkenness, I managed to topple him to the floor as well. We wrestled a very brief match on the living room carpet, me crying and calling Keith every nasty name I could remember, and flailing at him wildly with my fists. Keith gaining the advantage quickly. Even dead drunk, the man was big and strong and over 70 pounds heavier than me. He pinned me to the floor, his fists tight around my wrists. "Let me go, goddammit, son of a bitch, motherfucking." I struggled in vain to free myself from Keith's grips, tears streaming down the sides of my face and puddling in my ears. "God damn it, Keith, you're hurting me." "Am I?" he said. "Good. I'm glad I can hurt you too." You see, his voice was a raspy hiss. I could feel his arms trembling with rage. "I can hurt you too." A tear executed a perfect dive from Keith's eyes and landed cool against my cheek. He let go of my wrists and collapsed against me, his face against my shirt. "God damn you," he cried. "Why do you do this to me?" "I love you, and I just want you to love me the same." "Just the same? Is that asking so goddamn much?" "But I do love you," I blubbered. "No, I do." "Then why do you hurt me like this?" "Because," I managed between sobs, "because I'm a neurotic asshole. I don't know." I wrapped my arms around Keith's back, grabbed handfuls of his shirt. We just wept together for a while. Finally, Keith raised up on his hands and looked down at my face. "Oh, Jesus," he said. "You're bleeding. I've made you bleed. I'm so sorry, babe." He began kissing my face, licking up my tears and blood and snot. "No, I'm sorry," I said. "I won't go." "I don't care," Keith said, looking at the tiny wound at the side of my mouth. "Really, I don't." But Keith was kissing me harder, causing some pain against my sore mouth, grunting deep in his throat and rubbing against me, and we made love, fiercely, on the floor. So I never went to dinner with Sly, and he never called me again. And I really didn't mind it all that much, in and of itself. Still, the fact that Keith and I had actually come to blows, that blood, and my blood at that, had been shed over my having dinner with an old friend, all right then, an old flame, disturbed me. And I began to wonder, how many other friends might Keith forbid me to see? What might I do to incur the big guy's wrath next? Was he planning to make a habit of slapping me around and then boffing the daylights out of me afterwards, a la Stanley and Stella? I was beginning to feel like a caged bird. I had, after all, relinquished a certain amount of my wanted freedom for Keith. I had become for him about as domesticated as I could, I imagined, possibly becoming. And now I was being told with whom I could and could not have dinner. And if the bars that held me captive were indeed the brawny arms of the man I loved, still, a cage is a cage. And I began to wonder. If maybe, just maybe, moving in with Keith Keller might not have been, and oh, how the dewy-eyed ronettes, romantic in me cried, "No, no, don't even think it," might it not have been a mistake.